Hey guys, tonight we begin with the remarkable persistence of medieval mysteries. Stories that for centuries were dismissed as legends, rumors, or exaggerated tales written by monks with too much time and questionable wine have slowly started revealing their secrets under the careful eyes of modern science. For a long time, historians believed many medieval stories were simply myths. Strange events recorded in old manuscripts were often blamed on superstition, fear, or creative storytelling. But in recent years, archaeology, DNA analysis, and modern technology have begun uncovering surprising truths hidden beneath the pages of history. What once sounded impossible is now slowly becoming explainable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how many people from around the world are listening together. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease slowly into tonight's journey through some of the strangest mysteries from the medieval world. Lincoln Cathedral is one of the most impressive Gothic buildings in England. Its towering arches, flying buttresses, and enormous stained glass windows were built to inspire awe, devotion, and perhaps a little fear of divine judgment. But in the 1960s, something unusual was discovered beneath this magnificent structure. Archaeologists working below the cathedral uncovered a skeleton. At first, everyone assumed it must belong to a monk. After all, what else would a skeleton be doing buried beneath a medieval cathedral? However, the burial looked strange. The body had been placed face down in the ground, which was unusual for religious burials. There were no religious objects, no monk's robes, and none of the typical signs of a church burial. It looked less like a holy brother, and more like someone who had been buried quickly during a moment of confusion. For centuries, people assumed this person must have been disgraced or punished, but modern science would soon reveal a much more surprising story. When scientists examined the skeleton using isotope analysis, they discovered something unexpected. The man buried beneath Lincoln Cathedral was not local at all. The chemical traces preserved in his bones suggested he had grown up far from England. In fact, the evidence pointed toward Scandinavia. This meant the mysterious skeleton was likely a pilgrim who had traveled a very long distance. During the Middle Ages, many pilgrims journeyed across Europe to visit holy sites. These trips could take months or even years. Travel was dangerous. Roads were rough. Food was limited, and illness was common. But pilgrims believed the journey could bring spiritual rewards or miracles. The Scandinavian man may have walked hundreds of miles hoping to reach the famous cathedral. Instead, it seems he collapsed somewhere near the church. The clergy likely buried him beneath the building out of respect, even though they knew he was not a monk. For centuries, people believed he was a mysterious criminal. But the truth was far simpler. He was just an exhausted traveler who believed deeply in his journey. Traveling across medieval Europe was not an easy adventure. Pilgrims often walked hundreds or even thousands of kilometers on foot. There were no modern roads, no maps that could be trusted, and certainly no comfortable places to rest along the way. A typical pilgrim carried only a few belongings: a walking staff, a small bag of food, and perhaps a religious symbol showing the purpose of their journey. Food was simple and sometimes scarce: bread, salted fish, dried meat, and whatever could be purchased in the villages along the road. Many pilgrims depended on the kindness of strangers or the hospitality of monasteries. But the dangers were constant. Bandits sometimes attacked travelers on isolated roads. Disease could spread quickly in crowded inns, and harsh weather could turn a simple journey into a deadly challenge. Despite these risks, thousands of people still chose to travel. For them, the pilgrimage was not just a trip. It was an act of faith. They believed that visiting sacred places could bring forgiveness, healing, or divine blessings. The Scandinavian pilgrim buried beneath Lincoln Cathedral was likely one of these travelers. He may have walked for months across forests, mountains, and unfamiliar towns. And somewhere near the cathedral, after completing an incredibly difficult journey, his strength finally failed. For centuries, the strange burial beneath Lincoln Cathedral puzzled historians. The face-down position of the skeleton looked unusual and even suspicious. In medieval Europe, most Christian burials were done with the body placed carefully on the back, facing upward toward the heavens. But this man had been buried differently. Some people believe this meant he had committed a crime. Others thought he might have been an outcast or a heretic. But modern research suggests a much simpler explanation. When the pilgrim died, the clergy probably did not know who he was or where he came from. They may have discovered the body suddenly and needed to bury him quickly. The unusual position could simply be the result of a hurried burial rather than any kind of punishment. Over time, the story changed. What began as a quiet burial for a stranger slowly turned into a mysterious legend. For generations, people imagined dark secrets behind the grave. Yet the truth was far less dramatic. The man was not a criminal. He was simply a traveler who had come from far away and never made it back home. Today, the skeleton beneath Lincoln Cathedral tells a very human story. Thanks to modern scientific techniques, historians can now learn details about people who lived centuries ago. The chemicals preserved inside bones reveal information about diet, climate, and even the regions where someone grew up. Through these methods, researchers discovered that the mysterious skeleton was a Scandinavian traveler who had journeyed across Europe during the Middle Ages. What once looked like a strange and suspicious burial now appears to be something far more ordinary. A pilgrim reaching the end of an exhausting journey. In many ways, his story represents thousands of other medieval travelers whose names were never recorded. People who walked across continents guided only by faith, curiosity, and determination. Their lives were difficult and often dangerous, yet their journeys connected distant parts of Europe long before modern transportation existed. And sometimes, centuries later, the quiet bones left behind still carry stories waiting to be discovered. Stories that remind us how much history can change once science begins asking the right questions. History often remembers kings through grand stories of battles, victories, and political drama. But sometimes the most surprising part of a king's story happens centuries after he dies. One such story belongs to Richard III, a medieval king of England, whose reputation has been debated for more than 500 years. Many people know Richard III from the famous play written by William Shakespeare. In the play, he appears as a villainous ruler, a man willing to do almost anything to gain power. Whether that description is completely fair is still debated by historians. What is certain, however, is how his life ended. In the year 1485, Richard III fought in the Battle of Bosworth Field. During that battle, he was defeated and killed. After the battle, his body was taken to the nearby city of Leicester. At the time, he was buried in a church called Greyfriars. But over the centuries, that church disappeared. Buildings were destroyed, land was redeveloped, and eventually the exact location of the king's grave was forgotten. For hundreds of years, historians argued about where the last Plantagenet king of England might be buried. Some believed the body had been moved. Others believed it had been lost forever. Then, more than 5 centuries later, an unexpected discovery began to change everything. In the year 2012, a group of archaeologists decided to search for the lost grave of Richard III. Their research suggested that the old Greyfriars Church might once have stood beneath a modern parking lot in the city of Leicester. It seemed almost unbelievable. Could the remains of a medieval king really be buried beneath a simple car park? Nevertheless, the team began excavating the area. Within a short time, they discovered human remains buried beneath the asphalt. The skeleton belonged to a man who had died in battle. The bones showed clear signs of violent injuries. The skull had been struck by weapons, and the spine showed a noticeable curve. Historians knew that Richard III had suffered from a curved spine, which immediately made the discovery extremely interesting. But finding a skeleton was only the first step. To confirm the identity, scientists needed something more reliable than historical guesses. They turned to modern DNA testing. Researchers located living descendants of Richard's family line and compared their DNA with samples taken from the skeleton. The results were remarkable. After more than 500 years, the lost king had finally been found. The discovery of Richard III's remains became one of the most famous archaeological finds of modern times. For centuries, his burial place had been one of England's great historical mysteries. Now, science had finally provided an answer. The skeleton discovered beneath the parking lot was officially confirmed to be Richard III. The evidence matched historical descriptions of his injuries and physical condition. After careful study, the remains were given a proper royal burial. In 2015, Richard III was reburied in Leicester Cathedral during a ceremony attended by historians, officials, and members of the public. The event symbolized the end of a mystery that had lasted for more than 5 centuries. It also reminded people how modern science can reveal new truths about the past. Stories once based only on rumors and legends can now be tested using archaeology, DNA analysis, and historical research. In the case of Richard III, these tools transformed a forgotten parking lot into one of the most important archaeological sites in England. And they prove that even the most unlikely places can still hide pieces of history waiting to be rediscovered. In the world of medieval history, few objects are as mysterious as the Voynich Manuscript. Discovered in 1912 by a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich, the manuscript immediately confused everyone who examined it. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary medieval book. The pages are made from vellum, a writing material prepared from animal skin that was commonly used during the Middle Ages. But the writing inside the manuscript is unlike anything historians had ever seen. The text is written in an unknown script. The symbols do not match Latin, Greek, or any other known medieval language. Even stranger are the illustrations. The book contains drawings of plants that do not appear to exist in the natural world. There are also strange diagrams of stars, mysterious circular charts, medieval manuscript illustration, women bathing in green pools, modest clothing, covered bodies, historical style, no nudity. For more than a century, scholars have tried to understand the purpose of this unusual book. Some believed it might be a secret code. Others suspected it could be an elaborate medieval hoax. Whatever the truth might be, the Voynich manuscript quickly became one of the most puzzling artifacts ever discovered from the medieval world. For decades, historians, linguists, and codebreakers tried to decipher the Voynich manuscript. Even experts who had worked on military encryption during World War II studied the strange text, but none of them succeeded. The symbols seemed to follow patterns similar to real language, yet no translation could be confirmed. Because of this, many people began wondering whether the book was simply nonsense. Perhaps a clever medieval writer had created a fake language to impress wealthy collectors. However, new technologies eventually offered fresh hope. Researchers began analyzing the manuscript using computers and artificial intelligence. These tools allowed scientists to study patterns within the mysterious symbols in ways that earlier scholars could not. Some recent studies suggest that the writing might represent an early form of a Romance language related to Latin. If this theory is correct, the manuscript could contain medical information or herbal knowledge written in a dialect that later disappeared. Although the text has not been fully decoded, modern research has shown that the manuscript is probably not random gibberish. Instead, it appears to be a meaningful text whose secrets have simply been hidden by time and language. Today, the Voynich manuscript remains one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. The book is currently preserved at Yale University, where researchers continue studying its pages. Every few years, a new theory appears, claiming that the mystery has finally been solved. Yet, so far, none of these explanations have convinced the entire academic community. What makes the manuscript so fascinating is the combination of strange writing and unusual illustrations. The plants drawn in the book do not clearly match any known species. The star charts seem connected to medieval astrology, and the drawings of bathing women suggest the text might contain instructions related to medicine or health. Some historians even compare the manuscript to a medieval guidebook filled with herbal remedies and medical advice. If that idea is true, the author may have written the book for a small group of readers who understood the unusual dialect. Centuries later, the knowledge required to read it may simply have disappeared until the manuscript is fully decoded. The Voynich manuscript will continue to stand as one of the most intriguing mysteries left behind by the medieval world. In the 12th century, in a small English village called Woolpit, something unusual was recorded by local chroniclers. According to these accounts, two children suddenly appeared near the edge of the village. They were not recognized by anyone. They did not speak the local language. And most strangely of all, their skin had a noticeable green tint. The villagers were confused and cautious. In medieval England, anything unfamiliar could easily be seen as dangerous or supernatural. The children were brought into the village and given food, but they refused almost everything that was offered to them. Bread, meat, and vegetables were all rejected. For several days, they survived only by eating raw beans that were found nearby. This strange behavior only added to the mystery. Where had they come from? Why did they look so unusual? And why did they behave so differently from other children? At the time, people had no clear answers. Some believed the children might have come from another world. Others thought they were victims of some unknown illness. But whatever the truth might have been, their arrival quickly became one of the most unusual stories recorded in medieval England. As time passed, the villagers continued trying to understand the two children. The boy and the girl spoke in a language that no one in the village could recognize. Their words did not resemble English, Latin, or any other known language used in the region. Communication was difficult. The children could not explain where they had come from or how they arrived in Woolpit. Gradually, the girl began learning English. Over time, she was able to communicate simple ideas. The boy, however, became weak and eventually died, which was not uncommon during the Middle Ages. After learning enough of the local language, the girl shared a story that puzzled the villagers even more. She claimed that she and her brother came from a place where the sun never fully shone. According to her description, their home existed in a constant twilight. She also said that they had been tending animals when they entered a cave and somehow emerged near Woolpit. For the villagers, this explanation sounded mysterious and almost impossible. Yet it was the only account they had. Modern historians have studied the story of the Green Children of Woolpit and offered more practical explanations. One theory suggests that the children may have been refugees from a nearby region in Europe, possibly from Flemish communities that had migrated to England. During times of conflict, families were often displaced, and children could become separated from their parents. If the children spoke a different language, it would explain why the villagers could not understand them. The green tint of their skin may also have a natural explanation. Malnutrition can sometimes cause changes in skin color, especially when a person is not receiving enough proper nutrition. Once the surviving girl began eating a normal diet, historical records suggest that her skin gradually returned to a more typical color. Over time, the mystery became less supernatural and more human. What once appeared to be a strange and otherworldly event may have simply been a story of lost children struggling to survive in unfamiliar surroundings. Even so, the story has remained one of the most fascinating medieval mysteries ever recorded. If you walk into some of the oldest churches in England, you may notice strange markings carved into the stone walls. At first glance, these carvings look mysterious and even unsettling. For many years, historians believed these symbols were meant to protect people from evil spirits. Some thought they were magical signs designed to trap demons or prevent witches from entering the church. The patterns often include circles, intersecting lines, and shapes that seem too deliberate to be random. Because of this, many researchers assumed these markings had a deeper supernatural meaning. After all, medieval life was filled with beliefs about unseen forces, and churches were considered sacred places that needed protection. However, as more churches were studied, something unexpected began to appear. The same types of markings were found again and again, not just in one location, but across different regions. And when researchers looked more closely, they realized that not all of these carvings looked magical. Some looked surprisingly ordinary. Modern archaeologists decided to study these carvings more carefully using new technology. They documented thousands of markings across different churches. What they discovered completely changed the original theory. Many of the carvings were not magical symbols at all. Instead, they were simple drawings and personal marks left by ordinary people. Some carvings showed ships, swords, and even names scratched into the stone. Others appeared to be patterns created during moments of boredom or quiet reflection. It turns out that people in medieval times sometimes carved into church walls for the same reasons people leave marks today: to record their presence, to express something personal, or simply because they had the opportunity. While a few symbols may have had protective meaning, most were far more human. They were not signs of fear. They were signs of everyday life. For centuries, people living along the northern coast of Germany told stories about a lost city called Rungholt. According to legend, it was a wealthy and powerful town that disappeared beneath the sea in a single night. Some believed the city was destroyed as punishment for its pride and arrogance. Others thought it was simply a myth, a story used to explain powerful storms and rising tides. But the mystery did not end there. Modern researchers began investigating the area using advanced tools such as sonar and underwater mapping. What they discovered was remarkable. Beneath the shallow waters, traces of a real settlement began to appear. Remains of structures, drainage systems, and ancient land divisions were found hidden under layers of mud and water. The lost city of Rungholt was not just a legend. It had truly existed, and it had been destroyed by a powerful storm in the year 1362. What once sounded like a mythical story turned out to be a real historical event. In the English countryside, hidden beneath ordinary farmland, there exists a cave system that has puzzled historians for years. Known as Cainton Caves, this underground structure appears to belong to another time. The narrow passages, carved stone walls, and unusual pillars give the impression of a secret medieval chamber. For many years, people believed this cave was connected to the Knights Templar. The Templars were a powerful medieval order surrounded by mystery, often linked to hidden rituals and secret knowledge. Because of this, the cave quickly became associated with legends of secret meetings and forbidden practices. Visitors who entered the cave described an atmosphere that felt ancient and mysterious. The design seemed too deliberate to be random. It looked like a place created for a specific purpose. However, as researchers began studying the cave more carefully, a different story started to emerge. The structure was likely not medieval at all. Instead, evidence suggested it may have been built much later, possibly during the 19th century. What once seemed like a secret Templar site may have simply been a carefully designed underground space created for entirely different reasons. One of the most famous mysteries in English history involves two young boys known as the Princes in the Tower. In the year 1483, Edward V and his younger brother Richard were placed inside the Tower of London. They were supposed to be protected. Instead, they were never seen again. At the time, their uncle Richard III became king shortly after their disappearance. This led many people to suspect that he was responsible. However, no clear evidence was ever found. Centuries later, in 1674, workers discovered two small skeletons buried beneath a staircase in the tower. The remains were believed to belong to the missing princes, but no scientific testing was performed at the time. The bones were placed in Westminster Abbey, where they remain today. Even now, historians continue to debate what truly happened. Were the princes murdered, or did something else occur? The mystery remains unsolved. In the year 1518, something strange happened in the city of Strasbourg. A woman stepped into the street and began dancing. At first, it seemed unusual, but harmless. However, she did not stop. Soon, others began joining her. Within days, dozens of people were dancing uncontrollably. Within weeks, the number grew into the hundreds. Some dancers collapsed from exhaustion. Others reportedly died. No one could explain what was happening. At the time, people believed it might be a curse or a form of possession. Authorities even hired musicians, hoping the dancing would resolve itself. Instead, the situation grew worse. Today, historians believe the event may have been caused by mass psychological stress or illness. Another theory suggests that contaminated food may have affected the population. Whatever the cause, the dancing plague remains one of the strangest events in European history. Baldwin IV, known as the Leper King of Jerusalem, lived a life that surprised many. Diagnosed with leprosy at a young age, he was expected to live only a short time. Instead, he became king and ruled with determination. Despite his illness, Baldwin led armies and defended his kingdom during a difficult period. His condition gradually weakened him, but he continued to fulfill his duties as a ruler. Those around him knew that his time was limited, yet he remained committed to his responsibilities. His story stands as an example of resilience during the medieval period. In a time when disease often meant isolation or death, Baldwin managed to lead a kingdom and leave a lasting legacy. His life reminds us that even in difficult circumstances, individuals could still shape history. Each of these stories reveals something important about the medieval world. At first, many of these events were misunderstood. They were explained through superstition, fear, or incomplete knowledge. But over time, modern science and research have begun uncovering the truth behind these mysteries. What once seemed impossible often has a logical explanation. However, this does not make the stories any less fascinating. In many ways, the combination of mystery and discovery makes history even more interesting. It shows how human understanding evolves over time, and how the past can still surprise us. The medieval world was filled with stories that continue to capture our imagination. From mysterious skeletons to lost cities and unexplained events, these stories remind us that history is not always as simple as it seems. There are still many questions waiting to be answered. And with each new discovery, we come a little closer to understanding the past. If you enjoy exploring these kinds of historical mysteries, consider subscribing to Midnight History Files. Here, we take slow journeys through history, uncovering stories that are often forgotten or misunderstood. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next journey through history.